Ukraine has the momentum and continues to make significant gains, while Russia is increasingly resorting to horrific and indiscriminate attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure. President Putin is failing in Ukraine. His attempted annexations, partial mobilization, and reckless nuclear rhetoric represents the most significant escalation since the start of the war. And they show that this war is not going as planned. NATO is not party to the conflict, but our support is playing a key role. Allies remain united in their support for Ukraine's sovereignty and self-defense. Ukraine's Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov will join us tomorrow, both for the US-led contact group for Ukraine and for a dinner with NATO ministers. Together we will address Ukraine's urgent needs. I welcome the recent announcements by allies to provide more advanced air defense systems and other capabilities to Ukraine, and I look forward to further deliveries. Our message is clear. NATO stands with Ukraine for as long as it takes. President Putin started this war. He must end it by withdrawing his forces from Ukraine. And President Lukashenko should stop the complicity of Belarus in this illegal conflict. On Thursday, I will chair a regular meeting of the Nuclear Planning Group. The fundamental purpose of NATO's nuclear deterrent has always been to preserve peace, prevent coercion, and deter aggression. Next week, NATO will hold its long-planned deterrence exercise, Steadfast Noon. This is routine training which happens every year to keep our deterrent safe, secure, and effective. President Putin's veiled nuclear threats are dangerous and irresponsible. Russia knows that the nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. We are closely monitoring Russia's nuclear forces. We have not seen any changes in Russia's posture, but we remain vigilant. At the Madrid summit in June, NATO leaders decided a fundamental shift in our defense and deterrence to respond to the new security reality. We have doubled the number of NATO battle groups in the east of the alliance. They can be scaled up quickly to brigade size. We are also increasing the number of our high readiness forces. At this ministerial, we will take decisions to increase our stockpiles of munitions and equipment, to speed up the delivery of capabilities, and to use the NATO defense planning process to provide industry with the long-term demand they need to boost production. We will also address the protection of critical infrastructure. NATO has been working on this for many years, and following the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines, we have further enhanced our vigilance across all domains. We have doubled our presence in the Baltic and North Seas to over 30 ships, supported by maritime patrol aircraft and undersea capabilities. These efforts are closely coordinated by NATO's Maritime Command. Allies are also increasing security around key installations and stepping up intelligence and intelligence sharing. We will take further steps to strengthen our resilience and protect our critical infrastructure. Any deliberate attack against allies' critical infrastructure would be met with a united and determined response. Our final session will focus on NATO's missions and operations, from Kosovo to Iraq. We will be joined by EU High Representative Borrell, because NATO and the European Union face the same security challenges. We have a difficult winter ahead, so it's even more important that North America and Europe continue to stand united in support for Ukraine and in defense of our people. So, NATO allies have provided unprecedented support to Ukraine with capabilities, weapons, ammunition, different types of military support. And that is something, of course, we welcome, and we have encouraged this from NATO ever since the invasion started. Actually, we did that before the invasion. We have to remember that NATO allies have provided support to Ukraine since 2014, including training tens of thousands of Ukrainian officers, soldiers, which are now playing a key role in the defense against the Russian aggression against Ukraine. But after the invasion, allies stepped up. And of course, very much of the support that NATO allies have provided, the javelins, the air defense systems, the ammunition they have provided to Ukraine, that has been taken from existing stocks. So by doing that, they have reduced their stocks. But that has been the right thing to do, because it is important for all of us that Ukraine wins the battle, the war against the invading Russian forces. Because if Putin wins, that is not only a big defeat for the Ukrainians, but it will be defeat and dangerous for all of us, because it will make the world more dangerous, and it will make us more vulnerable for further Russian aggression. So that's the reason why we have used NATO stocks in NATO allied countries, to provide support to Ukraine. But of course, the longer this war drags on, the more important it is that we also then are able to replenish these stocks. And that's exactly why we now are addressing how can we ramp up production, so we can produce more, both to replenish stocks, but also to continue to support Ukraine. And I expect ministers to make decisions at the ministerial meeting tomorrow and the day after tomorrow on how to use the NATO defense planning process to agree on the more ambitious targets on, for instance, different capabilities, including looking into the possibility of increasing the targets, the guidelines for stocks. This will provide the industry with the long-term demand they need to invest in new production capabilities, because they have been able to increase production partly by utilizing existing production capacity more, but to really ramp up production, they need to make new investments. I also expect them to agree on how we can further strengthen our interoperability, ensure that allies can work together, and also jointly purchase ammunition capabilities, partly to reduce stocks, but also to actually ensure interoperability between allies. And the unique NATO defense planning process is, I think, the best tool to ensure that allies are coordinated and actually provide the long-term demand messages to industry to ramp up production. Over the last years, NATO has implemented the biggest transformation of collective defense since the end of the Cold War, and part of that is to take fully into account hybrid threats, cyber threats. And therefore also stated a few years ago that hybrid and cyber attacks can trigger Article 5, can constitute an armed attack against a NATO ally. And we have stepped up both our work on resilience, the protection of critical infrastructure. We are conducting more exercises both on hybrid threats and cyber threats, and we are exchanging best practices, and we've also agreed guidelines on the protection of the critical infrastructure. All of this is about protecting, for instance, undersea capabilities or undersea infrastructure, pipelines, cables, but also, of course, energy grids, energy production, transportation infrastructure. Of course, I cannot comment on those specific incidents because there are ongoing investigations, and I think we need to await the outcome of this investigation before we make any final judgment. But in general, I can say that, of course, we are closely monitoring every incident that may constitute a hybrid or cyber attack against NATO allies. And we are ready to take the necessary measures if needed. Exactly what kind of measure depends on the nature of the attack, and we will never give our potential adversaries the privilege of defining exactly where the threshold for Article 5 goes. That will be a decision we make as allies, taking into account the precise context, the specific situation we will face if there is a hybrid or cyber attack against the NATO ally. So first, we have already, of course, started the dialogue with the industry and with the different allies on how to ramp up production and refill or replenish our stocks. We had a meeting of the NATO armament directors a couple of weeks ago here in NATO, so this is an ongoing work. But when all the ministers meet tomorrow, of course, that provides an excellent opportunity to take stock of what we have achieved, how far we have been able to move on ramping up production, but also then to make new decisions on how to further ensure that we are not only digging into existing stocks to provide support to Ukraine, but actually also able to ramp up production. And we need to ramp up production of ammunition and weapons to both ensure the deterrence on defense of our own allies, NATO allies, but also to have enough to continue for the long haul to provide support to Ukraine. But just to prevent any misunderstanding, this work doesn't start now. It has been going on for some time, but of course the longer the war in Ukraine continues, this work on with the industry becomes more and more important because then they need the decisions, they need the NATO defense planning process, decisions, capability targets to be sure that actually they can make the necessary investments to be able to produce more. Then if the question was about how the attacks yesterday will change the situation on the battlefield, I think what we saw yesterday is actually a sign of weakness. Because the reality is that they are not able to make progress on the battlefield. Russia is actually losing on the battlefield. They are giving up territory because they don't have the capabilities to stop the Ukrainian forces making advances. So the way they are able to then respond is by indiscriminate attacks on Ukrainian cities, hitting civilians, critical infrastructure, and of course this causes suffering, damage on Ukraine, but in many ways it actually reflects the lack of alternatives for President Putin. They are losing ground, they have lost the momentum, and then they have to revert to missile strikes and air strikes in the way we saw yesterday and actually also today.